Hey guys, I'm Dr. William Summers, and I want to thank you for watching the third video in my series, Weight Management, A Class with ACT. There are reasons we went from 10% obesity before World War II to 40% today. What Martin Luther King said about our nation, albeit in a different context, applies here. We may all have come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. First, our pancreas is the captain of our weight control. Our liver, first mate. Insulin is made in our pancreas. Glucose homeostasis is the doctory word to describe the way our body handles and regulates our blood sugar to keep it in a normal range. And whether this regulation is done right versus wrong, it is huge regarding weight gain. This regulation is essential and complex. I'm going to give you the I have something else to do today version. When we eat food, the sugar and bits of food should travel to our intestines and then be transported into our bloodstream. We get sugar in the blood, and that is a good thing. We're not fed, however, until our pancreas makes insulin, which will take sugar out of our bloodstream. So yes, insulin lowers blood sugar. And when insulin and sugar hold hands, sugar can go inside our cells and we get fed. Without insulin, we don't get fed. Without insulin, sugar won't leave the blood. But do know this, that is only a part of insulin's job. It is also insulin's job to turn some of that sugar into fat, that white stuff generally placed in our lower belly. This is super necessary, so we store some fuel we can use later, between meals. Subsequently, if you are alive, you must have subcutaneous fat, that white stuff, under the skin to be alive. Insulin helps put it there. You don't need to see it or even know it's there, but it is. If you ate a meal earlier and started driving your car, your cells would initially be fueled by the sugar in that meal. There are only 3 substances that we eat. We call them macros, which are fat, protein, and carbs. And I mentioned earlier, I am using carb and sugar as the same word for these lessons. Meals normally contain about 50% carbs. And thankfully, when we ate that meal earlier, insulin turns some of that sugar into fat. That's called lipogenesis. So when your body's fuel, blood glucose, starts to get low, just like the gas in your car, your body will turn some of that stored fat back to sugar, gluconeogenesis, and save us from having to stop at gas stations for our body to refuel. It's pretty cool how all of this happens, and we just keep driving unaware. So I want you to understand insulin is not just the sugar-lowering hormone, it is one of the main fat-making hormones in our body. And I want you to realize that when you eat any meal, you want your fat-making insulin hormone to be as low as possible to make the least amount but the necessary fat you need for fuel between meals. Now, if for any reason your insulin level is higher when you eat a meal, any meal, you will consequently get more fat stored than you need stored. So the logical question is, how do I keep my fat-making insulin hormone level low when I eat? And I say, well, I'm glad you asked that question. I mentioned earlier, if you get a sugar in the blood, you get an insulin in the blood. So keeping your sugar low will keep your insulin low. There are 2 types of sugars. We create different names for these sugars, so I like to just keep it simple, so I won't get confused when the new words are made. 1, God-made sugars. 2, man-made some. When God puts sugars in foods, fruits, grains, and vegetables, for example, they are called good or complex carbs. When we eat God's complex sugars, the bite that goes into our mouth has to travel to our small intestines before any of the sugar is released. That long, snaky small intestines is where our nutrients are absorbed. And once that bite arrives in the small intestines, there are many specific gates where specific things are exchanged from our intestines into our bloodstream. There are designated gates where sugars are absorbed, and a bit further down, specific gates for proteins, and then different gates for vitamins and fats. For example, vitamin B12 is only absorbed at the very last gate of the small intestines, which is right before the small becomes the large intestine. This is way downstream. So if you swallow vitamin B12, it must travel a long way to reach its gate. And then at the gate, there are TSA-like checks. Vitamin B12 must hold hands with intrinsic factor made in the stomach, or it is not allowed through the gate and won't get absorbed. And when God's sugars get to their designated gates in the small intestines, they have to queue up for a chairlift, so to speak, so they can be actively transported from their gate into our bloodstream. This is a controlled process. It creates a desired controlled low flow of sugar into the blood, and that results in low insulin in our blood. And with low insulin, we get fed and store just enough fuel we need between meals. And just to show how God's sugar's design has even more potential control, The fiber ingested concomitantly in these same foods can block the sugar gates altogether, and the sugar will pass the gate as it is naturally moving downstream. And if anything passes its designated gate, it's not getting into the blood. That's how we get the term net carbs. If we eat a banana with 30 grams of carbs, that same banana also has 3 grams of fiber. The 3 grams of fiber will block some sugar gates, so 30 grams of carbs inside the banana minus the 3 grams of fiber equals 27 grams of carbs. Well, the point is this: God knew what he was doing when he gave us sugar. Historically, in any time period before World War II, it is estimated that obesity remained constant and unchanged and under 10%. And why? That's easy. Because people had no choice but to eat farm-to-table God's food. So why is it 40% today? Spoiler alert, man-made sugars. These get a variety of name changes. They're called bad, simple, refined, processed, syrups, and even sugars made in the lab. Man-made sugars occur when we take sugar out of God's design and put it into something else, or literally just go to a lab and create our own sugar compounds. And they do not behave like God's sugars. There are 30 grams of carbs in a soda, just like that banana. There are 4 calories in 1 gram of carbs, so both a soda and a banana have 30 grams times 4 calories per gram, or 120 calories each. But with the man-made sugar in this soda, with every sip of the soda, there is an immediate sugar bomb into the bloodstream. Man-made sugars don't travel to our intestines. They don't get blocked by fibers. They don't even use gates. Here is an example I hope will reinforce what I'm saying. If a patient of mine in the office had a blood sugar suddenly drop to 20, normal sugar is 60 to 100, and this patient passed out, if I bend down and place some table sugar, sucrose, in their mouth, they will stand up almost as fast as I stand up. If I put a slice of banana in their mouth, there will be no response. And with every sip of that soda creating a man-made sugar bomb, there will be an insulin bomb. And when our bodies produce an insulin bomb, higher insulin, that is a signal to store more white stuff. Think about the hunters and gatherers. We share the same endocrine system. If a natural tragedy wiped out their food supply, their survival would have been certainly threatened. That situation would have created high stress, resulting in an increase of the stress hormone cortisol. And this high cortisol would have intentionally created higher insulin levels, which would enable these guys to store more fat, fuel for later, in an environment with scant portions. This was a survival adaptation. And this cortisol effect on insulin also contributes to higher fat storage in our own society with higher daily stress levels. Man-made sugars have always been around as long as man, but historically these sugars were consumed so much less compared to God's sugars, until after World War II. With industrialization after World War II, it became scientifically proven that our brain responds to sugar bombs by making us subconsciously want more. Anyone with a food-making business added man-made sugar products to sell more, and everybody did and still does. And sugar bombs are happening all day, every day, creating insulin bombs to match. I am not finger pointing. I want to give you a quick history lesson in hopes of pointing our finger in a different direction. Coca-Cola was first invented in 1886 with cocaine as an active ingredient. It is not difficult to understand why sales soared after its first serving that year in Atlanta. And the company's defense, there was no knowledge regarding addiction, but in 1903, cocaine evils were known and cocaine was ordered by our government to come out. A smart dude studying the brain identified an area in the brain, the mesolimbic system, or what we call the reward zone. And anything that goes into that part of our brain triggers our crave for more. Every drug of addiction is a drug of addiction because it affects that part of our brain. And another smart dude with the most primitive technology was able to show that sugar bombs affect the reward zone. So when man-made sugars replace cocaine, sales continue to soar, making Coca-Cola to date the most successful food industry ever created. And adding man-made sugars became the competitive norm. If you're going to make and package and sell food, you needed to add it. When anyone selling food added man-made sugars, no one had an edge. Everybody was doing it. The playing field was tainted but even. Enter corn syrup. Man-made sugars holding hands with other man-made sugars, which created even stronger sugar bombs and greater insulin bombs. So we moved from a Hurricane 1 to a Hurricane 3. And then in 1970, high-density fructose corn syrup was created, which became the third ingredient by concentration in 70% of food products sold in this country. The second ingredient was water. And we moved from Hurricane 3 to Hurricane 5. The justification for adding it was that it was safe and cheaper. And I would add, if you're selling food and want to stay on the playing field, you'd better put it in. Please know this, high fructose corn syrup is illegal in most countries, including the entire European Union, because of its negative impact on the liver and its association with obesity. High fructose corn syrup was added in 1970, the exact year the already steady rise in obesity after World War II just straight up rocket spiked. High-density fructose corn syrup is still in our packaged foods, the third ingredient by concentration, where water remains second. It is packed in the abundant junk foods kids consume and considered a very significant cause of the significant rise in childhood obesity because it causes so much fat and creates "I want more." I will discuss nutrition later, but I want to interject now that to control this insulin, I'd suggest to every patient of mine to eat less than 100 grams of carbs per day, man-made plus God-made. It is a doable and sustainable number. I encourage them to become aware and find something personally doable to move away from the man-made sugar stuff. It is not easy because our brains will resist. Breaking habits is and will be the biggest challenge facing all of this. Our reward zone will complain. But numerous studies show significant improvement in feelings of well-being, behavior, and quality of health when this is practiced. Oh, one more add-on. Diet sodas and regular sodas produce weight gain, especially inside fat where our guardians live. Scientifically proven, University of Texas, 1992, scientifically proven. I just want to add one more story for motivation consideration. I hope I made the point clear above. If we get sugar spikes, we get insulin spikes, and we get fat storage spikes. In my opinion, this evolved protectively for ancestors at times with food insecurities. But I want to add more food for thought, pun intended. Mammals, remember animals that have hair and feed babies breast milk, are endocrinologically similar in about 90% of our endocrine hormones. Example, when I started medical school, pig and cow insulins were used routinely because we did not have the human analog. Ancient brown bears, mammals, whose insulin we could have also used, migrated to very cold areas, which was great for them, except there was nothing to eat in the cold winter months. Survival demanded change. All of us mammals have a pineal gland in our brain, which responds when it is light or dark outside, independently of our vision. So when the days get shorter, signaling cold weather was near, these bears' pineal glands signaled and their pancreas started spiking insulin. And suddenly their bellies grew so fast over the next 2 months they had difficulty standing up. Their behavior changed to fatigue and inactivity. Being energized, burning calories would not support this mission. 2 months, insulin spiking, and they had fuel for 4 months. And when they woke up because the fuel was gone and they became hungry, they had a flat belly and they were surrounded by plenty to eat. In the brown bear, we call it hibernation. In humans, we call it type 2 diabetes and obesity. We need to do something differently or be awarded a 4-month nap. If you were on Family Feud, standing at the buzzer, and the moderator called out, doctors were surveyed, what is the number one complaint by a patient in any doctor's office? The number one answer, fatigue. I presented an anecdote of quick, enormous weight in mammals with insulin spiking necessarily developed for species survival. And in the same setting, there is an associated extreme fatigue. And fatigue, obviously non-specific here, can be influenced by an overwhelming list of causes, but only an idea that may benefit from further scientific evaluation. I believe elevated insulin is playing a significant role in our fatigue pandemic. Avoid man-made sugars, avoid insulin spikes, avoid fatigue. Our government has called on to some of this and demanding some of these sugars be removed from our foods. It will take years. I've already seen brand marketing on products with smiley faces, new formula, like they are happy. They are being made to do this. But here's what I did learn. We can take these bad sugars off the label of ingredients and put stuff in that is allowed. But that stuff that we put in as allowable, after swallowing, can be turned into these same sugars we are trying to eliminate. Sales depends on this. Some smart people need to be watching this. Maya Angelou brilliantly said, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And I love quotes. Confucius said, it does not matter how slowly you go as long as you do not stop. And just one more quote from Teddy Roosevelt, believe you can and you're halfway there. Thank you again for watching the third video, Weight Management, A Class Without.